All right, so my name is Geoff Stearns. I work on the syndication team at YouTube. The syndication team is kind of like handling playbacks on the YouTube site that are, well, I should say, handling YouTube playbacks that are not on the YouTube site. So our team works on things like the iPhone stuff, the API that supports that, the Apple TV, all of the embedded YouTube players, which you'll see like on MySpace and Facebook and all that, and also the YouTube mobile site as well. And I'm trying to think what else we work on. We have a pretty decent-sized team here now, 8 or 9 people, and then there's a bunch of people in Zurich that also work on the YouTube APIs, the GData APIs, I should say. This link on the thing, I should say, is actually not the correct link, but it goes to a very similar presentation. It's the one I gave at Google I/O, so that link will probably be okay as far as if you want to follow along. So I want to start with just a quick example of what the YouTube embedded player is, just for people that may not be familiar with it, and to give you an idea. So this is the embedded player. You can see you can customize it a little bit by setting the color. You can set a border on the player there and pick custom colors. And of course, what would a YouTube talk be without YouTube videos? So I thought I'd show a couple funny YouTube videos, because they're always funny, and it wastes some time. Totally silly, but I thought it was pretty good. Here's another one, just an example of the player with the player set to being red, and of course you can set it to different sizes, of course. The one above is sort of an example of doing more of a widescreen shot, and this one's more of like a standard size embed with the border enabled. This video is pretty cool. These guys have way too much free time on their hands. So just to show some of the functionality of the players, basically a really simple video player. You have play, pause, obviously. You can seek around either by clicking on the seek bar or by dragging the handle here, of course. One interesting thing to note is that you can actually seek ahead. So YouTube uses progressive download on the videos, but we do this sort of quasi-streaming architecture where you can actually jump into any point within the FLV and continue playing from that point. So if I play this video, you can see the light red bar here showing what's been loaded. But I can actually skip ahead here. I should say before a point, or I guess before the video has actually loaded that far, and we'll actually make a new request to the server and then continue playing from that point. So because of that, we can have this sort of fake streaming type of behavior with the players, even though it's progressive download. We'll talk about that a little bit later. Some other stuff with the videos or the embedded players will by default load in these related videos. So you can see these videos here that load after the video plays, or if you click on the menu button, which is right here, you get these related videos that pop up, and you can kind of browse different videos and you can play them. Well, apparently some of these don't work on here. That's kind of weird. And of course you can get the embed code and the URL for the video there. All right. So moving on. Let's talk about the player API parameters. So some of the options you can control on the embedded player when you embed it. And the way you do this is by customizing the player. Let me actually show this first here. Random video here. If you come to the YouTube site and click on Customize right here on the side, you can pick a bunch of options for you. So you can choose your color, and these are just a set of default colors you can choose from. And you can see you get the little preview here. You can choose to show the border or disable it on the player. And then you can also tell it to either include the related videos or don't include the related videos. And the related videos are that menu on the bottom that I just showed. And when you change these, what you're doing is you're basically just changing the embed code parameters that are in the HTML for the player. So if I was to paste this in here, you can see this is the sort of magic part right here, is this URL right here. So the first part up to about here is just the YouTube URL and then the video ID. After that, we have the HL parameter, which is the language of the player, which we have, I think, 19 languages we support now, and we're always adding bunches to that now. And then we have color 1, color 2, and that's just hex value for what color you want the player to be, and you can set those to anything you want. You're not just restricted to the ones that are on the site. And then there's a bunch of other parameters that I'll show you here. So the rel parameter is just for the related videos. We already talked about that. Most of these values are either 1 or 0 to turn them on or off. Autoplay, 1 or 0, you can set the player to autoplay when the page loads. You can set it to loop, so it'll play the same video over and over and over again. Gets really fun for sound loops, or annoying, depending on how you think about it. Enable JS API and Player API ID are related to the JavaScript API, which I'll talk about in a little bit, so we'll kind of skip that. The disable KB flash, or well, I should say argument, disables the keyboard controls if you set it to 0. They're enabled by default, and then you have different keyboard controls here, and these also work on the actual YouTube site as well. EGM, I'm kind of going to skip because it's kind of a weird one. It basically just makes the little genie menu recommendation thing pop up when you mouse over it instead of only when the menu is active. Border is just the border on and off, and then color 1, color 2 are the 2 colors. So here's another example of like the blue player with the border turned on, and that's about it.
Is that the comprehensive list or just?
The question is it a comprehensive list? And yes, it is. It's pretty much a comprehensive list. There's a couple internal things that we use, but they're just not public. Let's see. So going back to here, so let's talk about the JavaScript API a little bit. So when you want to use the JavaScript API, it's pretty simple. You basically just add this enable JS API equals 1 parameter onto the URL of the player when you embed it, and the player knows that when it loads with that variable set, it's going to make a callback to the page, and it calls back just a static function called on YouTube player ready. I should say that on YouTube player ready. When the player is ready to receive events here. So if let me scroll down, I'll bump this up a little bit so we can actually read it. So here's all the different calls you can make to the player. Once it initializes, then you can have your JavaScript stuff set up. And I'll show you guys a little bit what the JavaScript, or how much JavaScript it takes to get it set up and working. So we have play, pause, stop. Stop is nice because it actually cancels the download of the video. So a lot of times if you're on a site and you hit play and the video starts downloading and it's like an hour-long video and you're not going to watch it and you have to let it continue downloading in the background, you could actually call stop video if you wanted to, and it'll cancel the download and close the netstream object inside the player. Clear video basically just clears the remnant of the video. That's good if you like pause the video and you want to clear the little remnant that's there. That's more handy in the Chromeless Player, which I'll get into later. Get video bytes loaded, get video bytes total are just the download amount of the FLV file as it's downloading. So if you wanted to build your own sort of progress bar and show how much is loaded in the player, you could do that. Get video start bytes is there to support the way that we seek in the video. So you can get the starting point of the video. Normally it's 0, but if you seek ahead to a point that's not loaded yet, then it would change. And then of course mute, unmute, set volume, get volume. Seek to allows you to jump around within the video just by passing in a seconds variable. And then there's allow seek ahead, either true or not true. And allow seek ahead allows you to either allow the player to jump ahead to a point that hasn't loaded yet, or not to jump ahead if the point hasn't loaded yet. And that's handy if you want to implement like a draggable seek bar. So if you drag it, click and drag it, you might not want it to seek ahead while you're dragging it, but as soon as you let it go, then you might want it to seek ahead. And that's actually how the players work internally themselves. Get player state allows you to query the state of the player, so you can see if it's either playing, paused, buffering, or if the video is queued or not. Get current time gets the current time of the video in seconds, and then you have get duration, which is pretty obvious. Add event listener, I'll talk about it in a second. And then we have set size. Set size is really only used if you're loading the player into another Flash file. So the players now also support being loaded into another SWF, not just in HTML. So set size, normally you don't need to call set size in HTML because you just make it the size of your embed code. And then you have get video URL and get video embed code, which just return whatever the URL of the video is, which is the URL to the YouTube site. And then the embed code is basically the same as the embed code you would get from the YouTube site. So going back to add event listener, so there's a couple events that the player can spit out. The first one is on state change, so we can listen for when the player changes state. So like if the user pauses the video, we can listen for that. Or if it suddenly starts buffering, we can listen for that. So that's pretty handy. And then there's also an on-error event, which right now only has one error, and it's just basically a generic, the video wasn't found or something went wrong. We're going to hopefully add another error to this soon that will allow you to know hopefully why the error happened. So back to the start. This on YouTube player ready call is what is called when the video initializes. So you basically pass in this JS API, enable JS API equals 1 variable, and then as soon as the player is loaded and ready to go, it calls this JavaScript function on the page called on YouTube player ready, and it passes it the player ID. Now the player ID is just a string that you pass into the player, and it's called player API ID. It's just another variable or argument that you pass in, and the player will pass that back. And the reason for that is that if you have more than one player on one page, then you can tell which player is initialized and which one's not. Let's see. So there's an example page here that shows some interactions with the JavaScript. So you can see right away, as soon as the page loads, I have player state equals 5, which means that a video has been queued, and it's basically ready to play if I were to call play. So I can either click play up here, or I can click one of these JavaScript controls down here. So if I hit play here, you'll see the video will start to play, and I can pause it. I can mute it, or say it's muted now, so I can unmute it, which is actually a bug. Don't pay any attention to that. But it actually does unmute it. And then we can seek around within the player. So like, let's say I want to seek to like 56 seconds or so. Well, that's as close as it gets. So you'll notice that when I seek to 56 seconds, it's actually jumping to 49 seconds each time. And this is unfortunately a limitation of the way Flash video works, and that's whenever you seek within a Flash video, you have to go to a keyframe that is specified in the FLV file. So the way that the YouTube seeking works is we actually, even if you're seeking ahead or within the FLV, you have to go to a keyframe. So what happens when you call seek to is we actually go to the closest keyframe to the seconds you specified. I should say the closest keyframe before the seconds you specified. So that way you're guaranteed that if I want to look at whatever is at second 52, that I'm guaranteed that that is going to play because it's going to go to the keyframe before. There's not really too much we can do to make this better. We're trying to work on putting the keyframes closer together and having more keyframes in the videos so that seeking is a little bit more granular. But it's sort of an ongoing thing, and then you kind of get a jumble of, if it's an older video, the keyframe metadata might be a little bit more out of date, I guess you could say, and might have less keyframes, where if it's a newer video that you just uploaded today, the keyframe data might be a little bit better. And we're slowly kind of going through the backlog and re-encoding videos. So this should improve over time. Let's see. So you can see on the bottom here a few more things. We have like the duration and the current time playing there in JavaScript, and then we have the bytes total, bytes loaded, and there's no event that gets broadcasted out of the player for that stuff. So you have to set up a loop and just query the player however often you want to get the data. I think in this case it's like every 250 milliseconds or whatever. I ask the player what these values are. Let's see. So I have a couple of other examples that use the JavaScript API in sort of cool ways that I thought I'd show and maybe get some ideas going. This is an example that I put together in a couple hours after I did the API, and it was sort of inspired by this old mashup that I saw where somebody had taken a Google video video of this guy racing through the streets of Paris in a Ferrari really fast, and he had synced up a Google map to it, and he had a little line going through it. So I thought I'd make sort of the YouTube equivalent of that. This is the BYOB race that happened this year. They did it on Vermont Street this year instead of Lombard Street. Now, the original thing that I sort of stole the idea from, since the Google Video Player doesn't have any APIs, you sort of had a little note saying that you had to, push play, and then he recommended that you paused it to let the video buffer and everything. And then you also had to hit play on the map that would sort of start this JavaScript animation of the map, which was cool and all, but like if the video started buffering or something happened, it would basically get out of sync very easily. And the cool thing with this is that since we can query the player for the current time, we can actually synchronize the map with the video. Even if the user starts messing around with the video or something, you can see the map still stays synchronized as you jump around. So I thought this was kind of a cool example to do. I think you can even grab the map and move it around, but it'll just jump back. The ending here is good when everybody kind of crashes. All right, so another example. This was made by a Googler, I think, on 20% time, that wanted to make a little sort of transcript debate app type of thing. So what this is it's a bunch of videos of some debate footage that this Des Moines Register put together, and I believe they have the sort of transcripts for the videos, and they synchronize the transcripts with the video as the video plays, and you can actually jump around to different segments and check out the questions if you want. So let me unmute this, I guess.
Hear from everyone. Very briefly, please, 15 seconds or so. Who in this country is paying more than a fair share of taxes relative to everyone else? The
So
wealthy,
it looks like at 21
the middle
seconds
class,
or so.
the poor,
So
or
you can see the thing on the right
corporations?
stays synchronized with the video there, and I can kind of scroll through and like pick a good question like they want to see.
Because they would like to pretend.
See what
the
Rudy
tax
has to
question
say
is
here at 4:04.
$50 in taxes, may pay $450 to their tax preparer.
Mayor?
That's a second tax.
A flatter tax, a simpler tax that you could file on one page as an option would be a good idea.
All right, bonus
Reducing the
points if he
corporate
mentions
taxes, as
terrorism.
suggested. Reducing income tax rates across the board, which would mostly
Oh,
benefit
it's
the
all
middle
about
class.
taxes.
That's where the
All right, anyway, that's that one. We were at Google I/O a couple weeks back, and we showed a guy this YouTube API at their booth, and he went home that night and came back the next day and said, hey, this is an awesome idea. I made this neat jQuery plugin that lets you synchronize slides and videos and things. So he came and showed us this thing, which
All right, so this is Mike Geary. So I originally got to know him because he...
and I believe this is him giving a tech talk here. I'm not sure when. And he basically added some sort of topics here, and you can kind of skip around in the talk, like if I want to jump ahead to maplet performance. Well, there it goes. And you can see as the video plays, it actually loads slides here off to the side. And it can actually load HTML URLs as well. I think it's just an iframe, so it can load things. So as the video goes, you can have stuff pull up of what he's talking about, and or maybe you could synchronize it to slides in a presentation or something if you wanted to. I mean, that would be another cool use of it. And as the video goes, you'll see it update the thing here. I think it's kind of a long video, so it takes it a while to update. But you can kind of jump around within the video as well here and skip around. So this was cool, and like I said, this is just a jQuery plugin, so you can actually go and get this and add it if you're using jQuery and make some cool stuff. Let's see what else we have here. All right, so JavaScript. Any questions about the JavaScript API so far? Yeah.
You mentioned earlier that you could use the set size. So if I wanted to dynamically change its size, should I rewrite the embed code and call set size, or just do one?
And is this in HTML or in Flash?
So in HTML.
Okay, so if you want to change the player size on the fly in HTML, I believe you can just set the size of the div or the object, or let's say the object or the embed tag on the fly. Now, I know Flash sometimes has some issues with that, and it'll try to reload the Swift when you call resize, but I know it's possible. I mean, I've seen it done. It just might be a little tricky to do. And when you do that, the player should listen. Like if it's not in a Flash app, the player should know when the stage resizes, and it should resize automatically for you. So you don't have to call set size for that case.
Do you have to preserve the aspect ratio, or will it know that?
So do you have to preserve the aspect ratio? And the answer is no. So the players, yeah, well so I should say it preserves the aspect ratio of the video always, but the player will just fill whatever space you give it. So if you give it, more width than it needs for the height, it's just going to add black bars on the sides. It used to actually shrink to fit the video size exactly, but we stopped that behavior because now YouTube videos used to always be 4:3, and now we accept we don't actually add the bars anymore, so they're not forced to be 4:3. So now we could have widescreen or really weird aspect ratio videos. So it's better to just have the player stay the same size and have the video adjust within the size that you give it.
But I can't like for some displays the pixels aren't square, so I need to distort the image.
You can't do that.
And I can't do that.
It's always stuck to whatever the video's default aspect ratio is. Let's see. All right, so we showed all these. So let's talk about the Flash API now. So does anybody use Flash here at all? All right, cool, a few people. So one thing to note is that the players that we use at YouTube are all written in ActionScript 2. We do this to sort of maximize the compatibility with our audience. So if you're using AS3, it gets a little bit harder to use the players. So with AS2, you can basically just load the player into your app and start making calls on it. It's really simple and pretty easy. If you're doing AS3, it's a little bit harder because you have to write some sort of wrapper Swift that can communicate between your AS3 project and our AS2 Swift, and also probably be like a wrapper for our AS2 Swift. It's not the end of the world, but it is a little bit of extra work, and there have been people that have done it. And have sort of posted their experiences on the GData API group, which I'll have a URL at the end of the talk for. So some of the specific things that you have to look for. So because of the way we implemented the player loading stuff, you actually have to query the player to know when it's ready. So what you'll do is you'll call load movie on the player Swift, and then once the player Swift tells you it's loaded, you're going to have to call is player loaded, every whatever 20, 30 milliseconds, whatever you feel comfortable with, until it says that it's ready, and then you can start making calls to it. Now you can say add event listener, in this case, takes an event and a handler function. In Flash, you can actually pass it a function reference, whereas in JavaScript, you have to pass it a string, because when you're passing values between JavaScript and Flash, you can't maintain, I guess, the scope of the function there. So you can't pass like a function reference through JavaScript to Flash, so you have to pass a string. So it's kind of unfortunate that all of your player event handlers have to be like static methods on something. So you can't say, here's like a function reference, pass it to this. You have to make it actually a function with string name. So let's see, and then we also have a destroy method that you should call before unloading the player, and that just goes through and tells the player to unregister any event listeners it has, and destroy some movie clips, and also destroy some class references that it needs, so that when you load the next, or if you're like, let's say you're loading one video in an embedded player and you're playing some stuff, and then you want to unload it and load another one, always make sure you call destroy, otherwise you could have big memory leaks and have lots of memory being taken up in your player, or in your application, I should say. So we have some example code here. I won't get too into this since there's not too many Flash people here, but we'll go into the JavaScript stuff in a little bit. Let's see. All right, so I have one example of somebody using the Flash API. Now this guy wrote this player called the JWFLV player, and it's a pretty common I guess you could call it open source player, but he still charges for some commercial licenses. I think he charges like 100 or 150 bucks or something. And he takes basically, it's a pretty simple video player that has a lot of options that you cannot, parameterize it. And I told him about the player API, and he said, oh, that's cool. So he implemented the Chromeless Player, which I'll show in a minute, into his player. So you can see his player can now play YouTube videos. If you just give it a YouTube video ID or something, he can load it and then play it. And you can see it's all using the player API to make his custom controls here. And he even added like a full screen button here. And he picked a really good demo video too. All right. Whoops. I just saw they were selling one of the Knight Rider cars on eBay the other day. I think it might still be up if you guys act fast. I think it was like $26,000 or something. Cheap, really affordable. All right, so this was really cool as far as a player standpoint, I suppose. Lots of people wanted to use it, but it wasn't quite enough for some people. Some people said, oh, I don't like the YouTube controls, they're ugly, or it doesn't match my site, or whatever your other excuse is. So I sort of decided that we should make a Chromeless Player. And the Chromeless Player is just a YouTube player that doesn't have any graphical assets in it. There's no controls, there's no little fancy genie menu thing, there's nothing. It's just the YouTube logo as a watermark. And I think we have like a loading spinner in there, and then we have like a big play button for if you queue a video and you have the little thumbnail that shows up, you still have the YouTube play button. And that's it. So there's like those 3 graphical assets. I designed it myself. Here's an example. Ta-da. Ignore that load video thing on the bottom there. It's very beautiful. And you did just see it in that demo that I showed with, the JW player. So let's show a couple other examples of that. Well, here, let me show this first. So this is the, I'll show you the page on Google Code really quick. So the Chromeless Player is, so it basically has all of the exact same JavaScript and Flash API calls that the embedded player has, with the addition of a couple of extra ones. So the extra ones it has is load video by ID, which just takes any YouTube video ID, and then it has queue video by ID, which also takes a video ID, and then it has set size again, which is basically the same as the other one. And I actually need to update this text here because it will now maintain the video's aspect ratio. So one option you have here is start second, so you can say load video by ID, and then you can also tell it to start at a certain point, and it'll jump to that point and start playing from there. Here's another example of a Chromeless Player, and this is just using the JavaScript API. It's a lot like the other JavaScript API page that I showed, only it has a few extra controls here. So here's our Chromeless Player. It's loaded. It says that the state is -1, which means that it's unstarted. So at this point, we can just pick a video. So like, let's say we want to load a video.
Hi, everyone.
And it's going to load and then start playing.
Chen.
Then I can pause it, play it, basically do all the stuff that you can with the embedded player. So a couple of examples of this. The guys at slide.com use the Chromeless Player for this little sort of customize your video player thing. I think this is I guess this is just for anything, I think. So you can have pretty much any video that's on YouTube. I always have problems with this when I try to search for stuff. It always tells me there's a problem. I'm not really sure why. But you can still browse the skins. You can have a bling player, which is pretty sweet. You can have an old TV player, paparazzi, and it's very interesting. Some curtains or something. See if this works. Yeah, I don't know why this works. This seems to work if I push search like 10 times. 1 out of 10 times it seems to work. I'm not sure why. Let's see. So here's another example of a guy that used the Chromeless Player to build his own controls for the player. And he basically lets you embed anybody's user channel stuff. And you can see he made his own custom controls here, and looks like he didn't implement the seeking ahead stuff, which is too bad, but he can still seek around here within the video. Excuse me. And you can see he has different options here, so you can choose different YouTube stuff. So we can say user favorites or YouTube playlists. So like I can choose my favorites here. So these are like my favorite videos pulled from YouTube, and I can jump around and learn all about the Hawaii chair and stuff. Okay. So I think I have one more example using the Chromeless one. This one's really simple, but I kind of like the idea. This is this is called Watch My 45, and the guy I used to work with made this. There's apparently a whole sort of society of people on YouTube that just film their 45s playing old music and stuff. It's like hard to find music, so you can, go and watch these videos. So he made a sort of little player mixer thing here. So what happens, it's pretty simple. It just plays one video, and then when the video's done, it detects that from the API and then plays the next one on the other side, and then loads another video on the side. So if you decide you don't like a song, you can skip ahead. And this player here will detect that this one started playing. And it should stop. Well, it used to work. All right, well, normally the other one stops when this one starts. I'm not sure why I did that. That's too bad. Oh, well, it worked that time. Interesting. All right. So I have insert demo here. So let's talk about the JavaScript stuff. Any questions before we start doing this stuff?
A small one.
Sure.
Can you put overlays, like if I want to put some HTML over top of it?
Okay.
For a transparent image?
So the question is, can you put overlays over the player? And the answer is technically you can, but it's against the YouTube terms of service to do that because we have things like ads we may want to show, or now we have like video annotations that show up over the video, which aren't in the embedded players, but they should be soon. So we don't want people to interfere with that. So the terms of service says that you can't do that. Let's see here. All right, so I have really bad luck with live demos, so what we're going to do is just sort of show you the JavaScript code that the embedded player uses. Well, hold on. Do you want to use the embedded player or the Chromeless player? Does anyone have a preference? All right. My water's up here. All right, so let's just do the embedded player because it's a little bit simplified, I suppose. So on my example page here, again, back to this one, so if I hit play, you can see the player state update and everything. So if I look at the source code of this, oops. All right, let's bump this up a little bit. So to embed the players, we recommend that everybody uses this thing called SwiftObject, which is a JavaScript library that does Flash player detection on client systems. So if you want to make sure, so one thing to note is that the JavaScript API requires that your users have Flash player 8 or higher because it uses external interface, which is in Flash player 8 and higher. So in order to prevent people with Flash player 7 coming to your page and going, why doesn't this work, and hating you, it's good to use something like SwiftObject that can actually detect what version they have installed on their browser and then embed it. So you can see the SwiftObject.embed Swift line right here. And then a bunch of parameters. So basically we're saying, here's the player URL, and we're passing in a few parameters here, and you can see we're saying turn the border off, which that's actually optional. We could take that out. And then we have enable JS API equals 1, and then next to that we have player API ID equals YT player there. So enable JS API equals 1 tells the player that we want the JavaScript API to activate when the player is loaded. So let's look at our JavaScript setup here. So the one magic function that I mentioned earlier was the on YouTube player ready function. So as soon as the player is ready, it's going to call on YouTube player ready, it's going to pass it the player ID. And then what we do here is we say get element by ID, and we give it the ID of the object or the embed tag that your player is embedded in. Now, the cool thing about using SwiftObject, again, is that it actually detects which your browser supports, either the object tag or the embed tag, and it'll only write one or the other. It doesn't write both of them like sometimes, like sort of, I guess, old days Flash embedding would do. Or if you just get code from YouTube, you'll see there's an object tag and then an embed tag nested inside that. So if you didn't use SwiftObject, you'd have to figure out which of those two tags were active and then get the reference to that tag, which would be the player. So in this case, we don't worry about it. We just say it's going to be my YT player. And then we set an interval to update the player info. So that's like every 250 milliseconds. And I'll show you what that's doing in a second. And then we can add an event listener for on-state change, and we say we want to use on-YT player state change to listen to the events. And then we have an on-error event listener, and that's on-player error. So you can see here that on YT player state change just calls set YT player state, which I believe just writes some stuff to HTML. Sorry, getting over a cold, so I'm not used to talking so much. All right, so you can see, so right here we basically have this YT player reference variable, and all of our methods here in our update player info thing, like get bytes loaded, get bytes total, get duration, these are all set down here, and we don't necessarily have to set them down here like this and have a separate function for each one. You could just call directly, YT player dot get player state or something like that. But I find it's nice to check for the existence of the YT player variable, so we can do a little bit of error handling for like the case if the player didn't get written to the page, like if the user has Flash Player 7 or something, and Swift Object didn't write the player to the page, then the YT player variable might not exist, or it would be false or whatever, and then we could just ignore the method and not have any JavaScript errors on the page. Looking at some of the HTML, it's really, really simple. Here's like our play link right here. And you can see it's just a hyperlink, and we just call play, and then that play function says ytplayer.playVideo, and that's really about it. Does anybody have questions about this stuff? All right. All right. So that's pretty much it for that stuff. I wanted to mention a little bit about the YouTube GData API, but there's other people that will give talks and have given talks on this stuff, so there's probably better people to talk to than me about this. The YouTube GData API, which is available, you can look at the docs here on this page. It's basically just all the YouTube data in XML format. I think it uses the Atom format if you're familiar with the GData APIs. It follows the same sort of standard as what they've said already. We added a cross-domain file to the GData server that does YouTube stuff, so you can access all the data using Flash now. So if you have like a Flash app and you want to load the stuff from GData, you can do that. And then now that you have the player, you could also load the Chromeless Player or the Embedded Player and play your videos that you load from the GData API. So you basically have all the tools you need to go and build like your own little mini YouTube and everything. And I have this example, but it's basically just to show you that it's just plain XML, which I guess, there you go. And there's a few other talks on this stuff that are around, I think, on YouTube. If you look at the Google I/O stuff, I think John Harding gave a talk on the GData API stuff. And that's about it. So I'm all done. Does anybody have any more questions? Yeah.
So what about API access to annotations?
So the question is, what about API annotation or API access to the annotations? Generally, we don't add player API stuff to like new features until they sort of settle in on the site. So the next steps for the annotations will be adding them to the embedded players. Once the feature set sort of settles in and they have a good standard for their features of what they want to keep, then we'll probably start thinking about how we want to make those available if we want to. I think we're still sort of tossing around the idea of whether or not we want people to do that, since right now you actually have to go to their special annotator tool to actually add the annotation. So it depends. It's a different team working on that, so we'll see. Whatever they decide, that's what we'll follow. Any more questions? All right. Well, thanks for coming.